In his victory speech, President-elect Joe Biden reiterated a pledge that he made throughout his campaign to reunite America.
It's time to put away the harsh rhetoric, lower the temperature, see each other again, listen to each other again. And to make progress, we have to stop treating our opponents as our enemies.
But with 7 in every 10 Republicans viewing Biden as an illegitimate president, his ability to reunify the country is limited. Instead, depolarization will depend most on the Republican Party and the coalition of voters it looks to build in future elections. America's political divisions are striking. In October, the Pew Research Center asked registered voters how they would feel if the opposing party won the presidency. 89% of Biden supporters said Trump's re-election would be very concerning and lead to lasting harm for the country. 9 in 10 Trump supporters felt the same way about a Biden presidency. And majorities of both Trump and Biden voters said that opposition is not just a difference of opinion and priorities. They fundamentally disagree about core American values. It wasn't always like this. In the 80s and 90s, there wasn't much ideological difference between the average Democrat and Republican voter. As recently as 2008, 62% of Democrats and nearly half of Republicans were ideologically moderate, slightly liberal, or slightly conservative. But during Obama's first term, the attitudes of both parties' voters became more polarised. By 2016, nearly 1 in 5 Democrats were very liberal, and more than a quarter of Republicans were very conservative. And as the number of moderate voters fell, the Democratic Party's electoral arithmetic, how much support they needed from different voter groups, changed. In the mid-90s, more than half of US voters were white without a college degree. Because they made up such a high share of voters, both Republicans and Democrats knew that winning the support of non-college whites was crucial to a successful campaign. Between 1980 and 2004, the party with the most votes from whites without a college degree also won the presidency. That streak ended in 2008. With Barack Obama as their nominee, Democrats gained almost 10 million more votes than Republicans, despite losing among non-college whites by 12 points. In 2012, he lost among the demographic again, this time by 25 points, and yet still secured re-election. Obama's victories provided a new blueprint for electoral success. If Democrats could win support among young and college-educated white voters in urban areas, and ensure high turnout from black and Hispanic voters, they did not need to win among whites without college degrees. In 2016, the Republican Party, under the leadership of Donald Trump, shifted its electoral strategy too. Trump took up positions that non-college whites supported, but which were unpopular among the Republican Party's base of college-educated white voters, including proposing a wall on the US-Mexico border and withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement. As a result, in 2016, the GOP lost among college-educated white voters by 7 points. Trump's triumph that year provided yet another blueprint. Republicans could win the presidency without strong support from college-educated white voters, if they could motivate enough whites without college degrees in rural areas to turn out to vote. In just 10 years, the Republican and Democratic parties had gone from competing over moderate voters to each having their own distinct coalition of supporters. This was a big factor in accelerating political divisions, with each party trying to appeal to a very specific group of voters. They could ignore other voter groups, or even worse, demonise them as a way of convincing their own supporters that they must get out to vote to prevent the opposition gaining control of the country's future, a tactic that Trump used particularly aggressively.
In our schools, our newsrooms, even our corporate boardrooms, there is a new far-left fascism that demands absolute allegiance. Our children are taught in school to hate their own country and to believe that the men and women who built it were not heroes, but that were villains.
And it's been increasingly easy to caricature opposition voters because the party divides by race and by geography have become so strong. Between 2008 and 2020, Democrats gained millions of votes in cities like Philadelphia, Atlanta, and Milwaukee, while Republicans perform better and better in rural areas. This geographic polarisation means that Americans are less and less likely to have colleagues, neighbours, and friends who support the opposition party. In 2000, 1 in 3 voters lived in counties where Democrats and Republicans received roughly the same number of votes. But by this November, that figure had shrunk to just 1 in 5. Donald Trump's tenure has demonstrated that the language a president uses really can shape attitudes, and Biden's commitment to a more unifying message should help to cool tensions across America, even if many Republicans refuse to accept him as the country's legitimate leader. But choices made by the GOP could be the most impactful in reducing political polarization. As more young people have attended college, and America's Hispanic and Asian populations have grown, the share of the electorate which is white and without a college degree has been falling. Non-college whites made up only 43% of voters in 2020, and that share is projected to continue falling to just 33% by 2036. So Trump's electoral strategy may have an expiration date. The Center for American Progress imagined a world where turnout and political attitudes among different voter groups remain the same between elections. They found that demographic change alone would increase the Democratic Party's popular vote margin by 2% in each election, and that by 2028, Florida, North Carolina and Texas would switch from red to blue. So the GOP has a decision to make. Will they shift to a more moderate platform, aiming to regain their advantage among college-educated whites, and compete with the Democratic Party for Hispanic voters? A Republican shift wouldn't unite America overnight, but it would be an important step. Before depolarization can begin, America needs two political parties that seek to address the challenges and priorities of citizens from a diverse range of backgrounds, and that seek to win over opposing voters rather than vilify them. America was driven to this level of division by demographic change. Time will tell if that change can also save it.